He laughed at her in front of the entire court, mocked her trembling hands, her plain dress, and the silence she carried like a burden. The hall roared with cruel amusement, their eyes following the prince's cruelty as if it were a game of sport. To them she was nothing, just a girl who had stumbled into the world of crowns and daggers, a fragile shadow in a palace built on pride. But what none of them knew was that behind her lowered gaze and quivering lips, a storm was waiting. A storm that would not only strip the prince of his laughter, but tear apart the world he believed he controlled. This is the story of humiliation, betrayal, and the dangerous strength of a woman no one saw coming. If you want more powerful, untold stories like this, stories of pride, revenge, and destiny, make sure to subscribe now so you never miss what lies hidden behind history's darkest masks. The hall smelled of wine, sweat, and arrogance. Courtiers leaned against gilded pillars, their jeweled fingers drumming against goblets as the prince entertained them with cruel jests. He was young, handsome, and reckless, raised to believe the crown was a mirror of his own brilliance. His words cut like a blade, but laughter followed him wherever he aimed it. On that night, his target was her. Elena. She was not born of noble blood. Her father was a minor advisor to the treasury, a man who had clawed his way into the palace through sharp calculations and quiet servitude. Elena had grown up in the margins of power, present, but invisible. The court women mocked her plain gowns, her quiet manners, the way her dark hair was braided without jewels. To them, she was a shadow, a reminder of what they never wanted to be, ordinary. But the prince saw something else. He saw an opportunity. When she spilled a goblet of wine by mistake, her hands trembling as she poured for a visiting duke, he seized the moment. Rising to his feet, he pointed at her, his voice echoing across the marble chamber. "Look," he sneered, "even the servants play at being ladies. Perhaps next she will sit on my throne, if only she can hold a cup without shaking." Laughter erupted, high-pitched, mocking, relentless. Elena froze, her face burning. Every eye turned to her as if she were an animal cornered in a hunt. She wanted to run, but her legs betrayed her. She lowered her head, clutching the empty goblet as though it might shield her from their gaze. Her humiliation was complete. What the prince did not see, what no one saw, was the way her jaw clenched behind the mask of shame. For beneath her silence was not weakness, it was calculation. Elena had learned since childhood that survival in the palace was not about shouting the loudest. It was about listening, waiting, and striking only when the moment was right. That night, while laughter still echoed in the corridors, she walked the long road back to her chamber. The moonlight struck her face as she stood before her small mirror, her hands gripping the wooden frame. She stared at her reflection, not the timid girl they mocked, but the woman she had hidden away. "They think I am nothing," she whispered to the silence. "But nothing can learn to become everything." The court believed the prince's words would fade by morning, that the mockery would be forgotten as new scandals replaced old. But for Elena, that moment became the seed of something larger. The next weeks were a test of endurance. Every time she entered the hall, whispers followed her. Laughter trailed behind her like a shadow she could not shake. The prince never missed a chance to remind her of her humiliation, sometimes with sharp words, other times with nothing more than a smirk. He believed she was powerless, trapped in her silence. But Elena began to change. She watched, she listened. She studied the court with the patience of a hawk circling its prey. She noticed who laughed too loudly at the prince's jokes, who nodded but kept their eyes lowered, who dared to roll their eyes when his back was turned. She catalogued every weakness, every hidden resentment. The court was not as loyal to the prince as it appeared. Beneath the polished smiles lay cracks, envy, ambitions, bitterness. The prince had mocked her before everyone, but in doing so, he had exposed himself too. His cruelty was not admired, only tolerated. And in a palace built on fragile alliances, tolerance was a brittle shield. One evening, at a gathering less grand than the night of her humiliation, Elena lingered at the edge of the room, listening. Two older courtiers whispered by the window, their voices low but urgent. "The prince spends more than the treasury can endure," one said. "He believes himself untouchable," the other replied. "But men who burn gold so carelessly often burn faster than they expect." Elena did not move, but her heart raced. The first threads of opportunity had appeared. She began to write, late at night, filling pages with observations, names, debt, grievances. Her mind, once caged by fear, now unfolded with sharp clarity. She was no longer the girl mocked for trembling hands. She was becoming something else, a collector of secrets. And secrets, in the palace, were more valuable than crowns. Weeks later, at a banquet meant to honor a foreign envoy, Elena entered the hall once more. Her dress was still plain, her demeanor still quiet, but her eyes no longer avoided the prince's gaze. As he raised his goblet and smirked in her direction, she met his eyes steadily, without flinching. For the first time, the prince hesitated, his words faltering mid-jest. He didn't understand why, but Elena did. She knew something he did not, because among her growing list of secrets, she had discovered one about him. A secret so dangerous, it could shatter not only his pride, but his future. And she was ready to use it. The secret revealed itself almost by accident. Elena had been walking the northern corridor, a place servants used to carry messages when the grand halls were too crowded. She paused when she heard muffled voices from a side chamber. Through the narrow crack of the door, she recognized the prince's tone. Arrogant, impatient, sharp. Yet his words were different this time. They carried not mockery, but fear. "I need more coin," he hissed. "Do you understand? If my debts reach the wrong ears, they will use them against me." A man's voice responded, lower, hesitant. "But Highness, the lenders grow restless. They whisper already, if you do not repay soon." "Then silence them," the prince snapped. "Do what you must." "I am not to be questioned." Elena slipped away before she was seen, but her heart pounded like war drums. The secret was simple yet deadly. The prince was drowning in debt. To the court, he was untouchable, a figure of endless wealth and power. But in truth, he was shackled by his own recklessness, bleeding the treasury to feed his vanity. This was no ordinary weakness. It was the kind that could topple him. Elena understood the danger of holding such knowledge. If she whispered it too soon, it would vanish into the air, dismissed as rumor. If she held it too long, someone else might uncover it first. She needed to wait, to sharpen the blade until the right moment arrived. But waiting did not mean idling. She began weaving her place into the cracks of the court. With careful words, she befriended the overlooked, the secretaries, the junior advisors, the wives left to linger at the edges of banquets. These were people ignored by the prince, yet they saw everything. They whispered when he grew careless, and Elena listened with the patience of stone. At first, no one suspected her. She was still the quiet girl who spoke little, the one who had once been mocked for trembling hands. But soon a shift occurred. A merchant's wife confided her bitterness at the prince's unpaid debts. A secretary grumbled about forged signatures pressed onto the treasury accounts. Piece by piece, Elena gathered the threads of a web only she could see. Still, she kept her composure. At feasts, she bowed when required, her dress plain as ever. But her eyes were no longer lowered. She met the gazes of dukes and barons steadily, as if measuring them against a silent ledger in her mind. The prince noticed. One evening he stopped her as she passed through the hall. His smile was cold, edged with suspicion. "You look at me differently now," he said. "Tell me, Elena, do you believe yourself equal to me?" Her heart thudded, but she answered with practiced humility. "No, Highness. I am only what I have always been." His eyes lingered on her, searching for cracks in her calm. But she gave him nothing. Finally he smirked and waved her away, certain of his dominance. Yet doubt had flickered in his gaze, and that was enough. By winter, Elena had become more than an observer. She was a quiet force. A whisper passed from ear to ear. Some dismissed her as harmless, but others began to sense something sharper beneath her stillness. A duke once remarked, half in jest, "That girl listens too well." One day she will know more about us than we know of ourselves. He did not realize how right he was. The turning point came during a private supper arranged by the queen herself. The hall was small, the gathering intimate. Only the most trusted sat at the table. Elena, attending at the queen's request, stood at the edge, pouring wine and observing. The queen, weary of her son's arrogance, pressed him with questions about the treasury. His answers were vague, dismissive, and for the first time, Elena saw the queen's patience fracture. "You waste too freely," the queen said coldly. "This kingdom cannot survive on your games." The prince flushed, his temper rising, but he bit his tongue under his mother's gaze. Still, Elena saw his hand tighten around the goblet. He was cornered, and men who are cornered are most dangerous. That night, Elena returned to her chamber, knowing the balance of power had shifted. The queen's doubt was a crack in the foundation. And if Elena could widen that crack, The entire palace might crumble on the prince's head. She sat at her desk, lit by a single candle, and opened her ledger of secrets. The page on the prince's debts was filled with names, dates, numbers, but she was no longer content to keep these truths locked away. It was time to choose her first move. Her hand hovered over the parchment, ready to write a letter that would send ripples through the court. A letter that would expose the prince's weakness to someone who would know exactly how to use it. But before her quill touched the page, a knock echoed at her door. Sharp, insistent. She froze. When she opened it, a folded note was thrust into her hands by an anonymous courier who vanished into the shadows. Inside, written in hurried strokes, were 5 words that chilled her blood. "We know what you know." The note trembled in Elena's hand long after the footsteps of the messenger had faded. "We know what you know." 5 words that turned her chamber into a prison. Her mind raced through possibilities. Who had discovered her? Who else had noticed her gathering of secrets, her careful ledger? She had been discreet, cautious, silent as stone. And yet she was not alone in the shadows anymore. For days, she moved with forced calm, her eyes scanning every corridor for signs of betrayal. She replayed conversations in her mind, searching for the slip, the gesture, the careless moment when someone had seen too much. But no answer came. The note was not idle. A week later, another appeared, slipped under her door in the dead of night. "Do not act against him yet. Wait." Elena's blood chilled. Whoever this shadow was, they not only knew her secret, they were trying to control her. She burned with anger, but she understood the danger. Someone powerful was watching her, someone who had their own stake in the prince's downfall. And so, she waited. But patience came at a cost. The prince grew more reckless, his debts swelling, his temper sharper than ever. He mocked her still, though less freely than before, for her steady gaze unsettled him. Rumors spread that foreign lenders had begun arriving at the palace gate, demanding repayment. Courtiers whispered, merchants fretted, and still the prince strutted as though nothing could touch him. Elena longed to act, to thrust her knife of truth into the heart of his arrogance. Yet the unseen hand that left her those notes pressed her into stillness. Wait. Her opportunity arrived not through her own choosing, but through a dangerous invitation. One evening, as snow drifted silently outside the palace windows, a servant delivered a sealed letter to her chamber. The seal was unfamiliar, neither the prince's crest nor the queen's mark. She opened it cautiously. Inside was a summons. She was to meet in the old library at midnight. No name, no explanation. Only a single line. Your silence is no longer yours alone. Fear warred with curiosity, but Elena had lived too long in shadows to retreat now. That night, cloaked in darkness, she slipped into the abandoned library. Dust lined the shelves and the air smelled of parchment and neglect. She waited in silence, every creak of the floorboards a knife in her chest. Then, from the far corner, a figure emerged. A man, older, dressed plainly, but with eyes sharp as daggers. "You've been watching," he said quietly, "and we have been watching you." Elena's voice was steady, though her hands clenched at her sides. "Who are you?" He ignored the question. "You have seen the prince's weakness, his debts, his arrogance. You have kept careful record. That makes you dangerous, to him and to us. We cannot allow a child's recklessness to bring down what we have built." "Then why not silence me?" she demanded. The man smiled faintly. "Because we need you. The prince has many enemies. Some wear crowns, some wear chains, but he believes himself untouchable. You can reach him in ways we cannot. You move where we are watched. You listen where we are ignored." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. They did not seek to stop her. They sought to use her. "And if I refuse?" she asked. The man's eyes glinted. "Then the prince will learn not only of your secrets, but of ours. And neither of you will survive." It was not a choice. It was a chain. That night, Elena returned to her chamber with her mind aflame. She had longed for vengeance, but now she was part of something larger, darker. She was no longer the sole architect of her plan. She was entangled in a web spun by men she could not see, bound to a game where betrayal was the only currency. Days turned to weeks. Whispers grew louder. The prince's debts became harder to hide. Elena, guided by subtle instructions slipped to her in coded notes, planted quiet seeds of doubt in the right ears. She spoke carefully at gatherings, nudged conversations toward the prince's excesses, fanned the embers of discontent. The court began to shift. Where once laughter followed the prince, now unease lingered. Nobles spoke of him with forced cheer, their eyes darting nervously. The queen herself grew more distant, her patience eroding like stone under water. The prince, sensing the change but blind to its source, grew paranoid. He lashed out at advisors, demanded loyalty with threats, and drank more heavily than ever. His once unshakable confidence cracked at the edges, and through it all, Elena watched, silent and steady, her secrets hidden deeper than ever. But one night, as she wrote in her ledger, another note slid beneath her door. This one carried no instructions, only a single chilling sentence. "The Queen knows. The Queen knows." The words burned into Elena's mind, a warning and a threat all at once. She stared at the note long into the night, her candle dripping wax like falling sand in an hourglass. If the Queen truly knew of her knowledge, of her quiet war against the prince, then everything she had built, every carefully planted seed of doubt, was now at risk. The Queen was no fool. She had survived betrayals, wars, and the reckless youth of her son. She understood power better than anyone in the palace, and now her gaze was turning toward Elena. The following morning, Elena was summoned. The Queen's private chamber was a place of heavy silence, its walls lined with tapestries depicting battles won and treaties signed. Elena entered with a bowed head, but her heart hammered in her chest. The Queen sat at a long table, her fingers laced together, her eyes sharp and unreadable. "You've been busy," the Queen said without preamble. Elena swallowed. "Your Majesty," Do not play the innocent." The queen's voice was quiet, but every syllable cut like steel. "I see what others do not. The whispers you encourage, the careful way you place yourself among my courtiers. You are no longer invisible, Elena. That is dangerous." For a moment, silence filled the chamber, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire. Then the queen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "My son is reckless. You think I do not see it? His debt, his vanity, his careless laughter. But he is still my blood, my heir. And you," her voice sharpened, "you meddle in things that could destroy us all." Elena's lips parted, but no words came. Her mind raced. Should she deny it? Should she beg forgiveness? But something deep within her refused to bow. She had endured humiliation, mockery, and fear. She had gathered power in silence. And now, standing before the queen herself, she could not retreat into weakness. "I meddle," Elena said carefully, "because his recklessness endangers everything this kingdom stands upon. You know it as well as I do. The court whispers. The merchants threaten revolt. Foreign lenders wait at the gates. He is not untouchable, Your Majesty. He is a blade pointed at his own throat."
The queen's expression flickered, a moment of truth breaking through the mask. She knew Elena was right, but her pride, her loyalty to her son, bound her tongue.
"You are bold," the queen said at last, "but boldness can become foolishness. Remember your place." When Elena was dismissed, her knees threatened to give way. The queen had not condemned her, but neither had she allied with her. She was walking on the edge of a blade with death on either side. Yet that night, another note arrived. This one was different, not from the conspirators who had bound her into their web, but written in a familiar hand, the queen's. "Meet me in the gardens at dawn. Come alone." Sleep eluded Elena. She turned the note over in her hands, weighing the risk. The queen might be testing her loyalty, or she might be seeking a confidant against her own son. Either way, it was a summons she could not refuse. At dawn, the gardens lay cloaked in frost. Elena wrapped her cloak tightly around her and walked the gravel path to the farthest corner, where hedges shielded the view from the palace windows. The queen stood there, her breath visible in the cold air. "You are not wrong," the queen said without greeting. "My son is unraveling. His debts grow heavier, his temper shorter. But the kingdom cannot know. Weakness invites vultures. If word of his failures spreads beyond these walls, we will not survive the storm that follows." Elena's breath caught. The queen was not here to threaten her. She was here to bargain. "You have gathered secrets," the queen continued. "You have seen what others hide. I need those eyes." Elena, not against him, but around him. "If we are to preserve this throne, I must know who waits in the shadows, who sharpens their knives. Help me, and you will not be forgotten." It was an offer Elena had never dreamed of, the queen herself asking for her alliance. But it was also a trap. The conspirators who had bound her in silence would never allow her to serve the queen freely. She was caught between two powers, each capable of destroying her. And then the queen's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "You must choose, Elena. My son, or his enemies. There is no middle path." Elena's heart pounded. The queen thought she was offering a choice, but in truth, it was a command. One misstep, one misplaced word, and she would be crushed between forces far greater than herself. She bowed her head, hiding the turmoil in her eyes. "I will serve as you ask, Your Majesty." The queen's lips curved into the faintest smile, satisfied. She turned and walked back toward the palace, her figure tall and unyielding against the pale morning light. Elena remained in the frost-bitten garden, her breath sharp in her chest. She had given her answer, but it was not the truth. Because while she had pledged herself to the queen, her loyalty now rested with no one. She would serve neither the prince nor his hidden enemies, nor even his mother. She would serve only herself. And as the frost melted into the earth, Elena realized that the power she had once only dreamed of was now within her grasp. But what she did not yet know, what no one knew, was that someone had been watching from the shadows of the garden. Watching as she pledged her false loyalty to the queen. Watching as she betrayed both sides with a single breath. And by nightfall, her secret would no longer be her own. By nightfall, whispers raced through the palace like fire through dry straw. Elena's secret meeting with the queen had not gone unnoticed. Whoever had been watching in the gardens had carried word swiftly, though she did not yet know to whom. The air inside the court grew heavier with each passing hour. The prince, already restless, sensed betrayal, but could not name its source. He drank more than ever that evening, his laughter loud and forced, his eyes darting across the hall like a man surrounded by invisible enemies. And Elena, she stood in the shadows as always, silent, steady, her plain gown disguising the storm raging within. She had pledged to the queen with words she did not mean. She had followed the conspirators with steps she did not trust. And now she stood alone, holding more power than either imagined. The moment of reckoning came sooner than she expected. The queen summoned her again, this time not in the quiet of dawn, but in the glare of the throne room. Advisors, nobles, and courtiers stood assembled, the prince among them, his face flushed from drink and suspicion. "Elena," the queen said, her voice carrying the weight of command, "you have moved too carefully to escape my eyes. You have seen much, heard much. Now you will speak." Elena's stomach knotted. This was no private bargain. It was a public demand. The queen was forcing her hand. "Tell us," the queen continued, her eyes locked on Elena's, "what you know of these whispers surrounding my son." The hall went silent. Every noble strained to hear. The prince's smirk trembled at the corners, his arrogance wobbling under the weight of doubt. Elena felt the eyes of the conspirators as well. Though hidden among the crowd, she knew they were there, ready to crush her if she faltered. It was the moment she had been moving toward all along. Her voice, when it came, was calm, even soft, but every word fell like stone into still water. "The whispers are true." The hall erupted, gasps, shouts, the clamor of voices rising like thunder. The prince lurched forward, his hand gripping the arm of his chair. "Lies! He roared. "She is nothing, no one. She dares speak against me." But Elena did not waver. "He is drowning in debts," she said firmly. "He has bled the treasury to feed his pleasures. Foreign lenders grow bold at our gates, and those who laugh at his jests now whisper in fear of his ruin." The queen's face was carved from stone, her fury controlled but visible. The nobles shifted uneasily, some nodding, others averting their gaze. The cracks Elena had studied for so long were now breaking wide before everyone's eyes. The prince's face contorted with rage. "You dare humiliate me before my mother, before my court?" His voice rose to a desperate scream. "You are nothing but a servant's daughter." And then he made his fatal mistake. He lunged, not at the queen, not at the nobles, but at Elena herself. His hand raised, his voice spitting curses. The hall gasped in shock as the crown prince, heir to the throne, abandoned all restraint in his fury. But before his hand could fall, the queen's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough!" Guards rushed forward, seizing him, pulling him back as he thrashed and shouted. The hall descended into chaos, nobles whispering, some fleeing, others frozen. The queen rose, her figure towering with authority. "An heir who cannot master himself, cannot master a kingdom," she declared coldly. Her gaze swept the hall, then returned to her son, her voice heavy with judgment. "Until his debts are paid, until his shame is mended, he is stripped of his authority." The prince's scream of protest echoed, but it was drowned out by the weight of silence. And Elena? She stood untouched in the center of it all. The girl once mocked for trembling hands had become the voice that shattered the prince's power. She had not needed poison, nor daggers, nor armies, only patience, secrets, and the will to endure humiliation until the moment was hers. Yet as the guards dragged the prince away, Elena felt no triumph. Power in the palace was never stable. Today she had destroyed him, but tomorrow others would sharpen their knives for her. She had chosen her path, and there was no turning back. She returned to her chamber that night, staring into the mirror as she had on the night of her humiliation. Her reflection no longer trembled. Her eyes no longer avoided themselves. She whispered, steady and sure, "They will never laugh at me again." But behind her confidence lingered a shadow, the knowledge that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She had survived. She had destroyed him. But survival in the palace was never the end. It was only the beginning of another war. History often hides the truth that the greatest battles are not fought with swords, but with silence, patience, and words sharpened into weapons. Pride can blind even princes, but humiliation, endured long enough, can forge someone into their undoing. If you found this story gripping and want to uncover more tales of betrayal, power, and hidden strength, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the untold truths waiting in the shadows of history.